There has been a great deal of controversy over the question of the existence of God, the ultimate reality. The real problem to my mind is not that of proving or disproving the existence of an eternal absolute, but that of defining it in an adequate and satisfactory way. The factor of blind and enthusiastic faith, created and strengthened by individual miseries and cravings in different cultural contexts, has added more and more confusions. Consequently, the man of reason and thought rightly feels disgusted at the very mention of the word God. There are various conceptions of the ultimate reality. People look upon him as differently according to their capability and understanding. The most commonly accepted conception of God is eternal power. So this is the first one. So what are the different conceptions of God could be a question for you. But the philosophical view includes the idea of Nirguna Brahman, which is above all multiplicity and distinction. It is beyond quality, activity, and consciousness. This Nirguna Brahman is regarded as to be the ultimate cause and substratum of existence, the superactive center of the entire manifestation. It is also known as Parabrahman. So some of these questions will be asked in a different manner. So they might ask about Parabrahman, they might ask about Saguna Brahman. So you need to be kind of well versed with some of these terms. Next comes the idea of God as a supreme existence. We see that the universe with all its diversities and differentiations, and we are led to believe in its creator and controller. We call him Ishvara or the Saguna Brahman. We think of him as an eternal existence which is omnipotent and omniscient, possessing all the finest attributes. He is the efficient cause of the universe and is also its preserver and destroyer. It is only when viewed from the lower standpoint that God, as a god of religion, becomes an object of worship, which is the final approach of almost all the religion. This Saguna Brahman is also known as Apara Brahman. So Parabrahman and Apara Brahman. Much has been said in religious books about the above mentioned two conceptions. Some think that the concept of the Nirguna is better than the Saguna. Others hold the opposite view. In fact, both of them are erring. They attain neither the Nirguna nor the Saguna Brahman. There are no doubt the two ways, but the goal is one, the realization of the ultimate or the eternal absolute. Both the conceptions of, as generally understood, are greatly misleading. Truly, God is neither Saguna or Nirguna, but beyond both. He is what He is. It is we who conceive Him to be Nirguna, and it is we who make Him Saguna. What we should do in order to avoid these quarrels is that we must fix our view on the original element, the Adi Tattva, be it Nirguna or Saguna. Whatever it is, we must love it. So, I think this is partly repetition from the reality at dawn. So that's why I'm just kind of moving without talking too much about it. There are three conceptions of God: the controller or the eternal power, then the Nirguna Brahman, and then the Saguna Brahman. And Babaji is now saying that God is really beyond Saguna and Nirguna. So long as we remain confined within the bounds of religion, the God of religion remains in our view, and we remain entangled in one of the other view. The highest spiritual attainment is possible only when we go beyond the limits of religion. In fact, spirituality begins where religion ends. Religion is only a preliminary stage for preparing a man for his march on the path to freedom. The end of religion is the beginning of spirituality. That sentence you know. So you know, and we have underlined that in the reality at dawn. So that's a kind of repetition from there. Thus, God is not to be found within the folds of particular religion or sect, is neither confined to forms or rituals, nor to be traced within the scriptures. Him we have to seek in the innermost core of our heart. Now, that's another question that you will get. Where do you seek God? Innermost core of our heart. Really, God is very simple and plain. He is not in solid forms. There is no solidity whatsoever in any kind of Him. God is simple and extremely subtle. In fact, the very simplicity and the purity of the ultimate has become a will to it. So we just spoke about it. So there will be simplicity, there will be subtlety, and there will be purity. That is what you're looking at as far as the ultimate is concerned. Now, obviously, the ultimate that Babaji is talking about is beyond all these things. So he says it's beyond Saguna and Nirguna. Now, if you take simplicity and purity as a guna, as a quality, then we have not reached the ultimate. We have to go beyond that to reach the ultimate. In order to understand the conception of God or ultimate reality, let us start with the stand taken by an atheist that there is no God. This is to say, in mathematical terminology, that no positive or negative value can be assigned to it. The mathematical sign for that, which has no positive or negative value, is zero or not. Now, let the atheist be faced with the question of what exists. A consistent agnostic can doubt and deny the existence of everything, but not of his own self, namely that which doubts or denies. Speaking again in mathematical terminology, it may conveniently be called expressed as 1. Look at the magical function of 0. As you go on adding more and more of that which does not exist, 0 to the right side of which exists, namely 1, it goes on swelling and multiplying itself. There is hardly a comprehensible limit to this expansion, and the Upanishads have rightly characterized this infinite expansion or bigger than the biggest, Mahato Mahiyan. Now, again, some of these questions will come. What is Mahato Mahiyan? What is Anoraniyan? Some of these questions might come. Then start adding 0 to the left side and the negative side of 1 with the function of negativating will, that is the decimal point. The addition of more and more knots will gradually bring 1 closer and closer to the 0. Again, there can hardly be any limit to the shrinkage of the self, and the Upanishads have rightly characterized this as smaller than the smallest, Anoraniyan. I believe that the controversy about the question of God is a fake one. It really arises due to the misconceptions with which God has become loaded in the course of history of the various cultural groups of humanity. The need, therefore, is to give up the impulsive approach to the problem because it blurs the vision and thus impedes progress of man towards his goal. So, Babish is talking about impulsive approach to the problem. So, we have an impulsive approach to the problem of God, and that creates a issue for us. For the sake of understanding, we may call it as 0 or the center or the base. No Prakriti or no universe can stand without the base. There must be a backing for existence, and that backing is God or Brahman. Ultimate reality. It is also the Bhuman, the substanceless substance, or the forceless force. Further, I may now reveal herein the true significance of a mystery little known to the people. Generally, they consider Sat to be the reality and treat it as a yardstick for measuring the knowledge of God. It is in fact in the all in this sphere of Maya and Tam alone. God is in the sphere of Tam. Now don't confuse between Tam and Tamasu. Tamasu is a quality. Tam is a state of God. This is the only thing worth achieving for a true yogi. It is no doubt very, very difficult to gain access to this point. To acquire Sat is a very easy job. But the state termed as thumb cannot so easily be attained. There is nothing beyond it. Though people generally talk a good deal about it, few amongst them even attempt to secure an approach up to it. Purity, simplicity, and peace even are not there. It is in fact beyond all of them. This is the very thing which is acquired after years of persistent labor for lives. I can boldly assert that even the greatest saints of the world have remained short of the mark in this respect. The stage of negation which one craves for is the real life, abides in it, and all activities cease before one reaches this point. It is the central point or the real state of being, which is, though, in most of the cases, remained unattained in spite of all the efforts. People consider this state of thumb as their deadliest enemy. But if you ever happen to study a person in whom this state of complete ignorance is reigning in full swing, you will feel that in the highest pitch of advancement, he will, like an infant baby, have no awareness of his own condition. But if a slight touch of Sat is applied to it, he will then begin to have cognizance of his state of thumb. This is due to the fact that the meeting point of the two leads to the creation of a new state identical with that which was the basis of creation. Generally, our eyes are attracted to anything that is bright and glaring, which we commonly misunderstand as Sat. This bright thing is nothing except Maya, and those who talk so highly about it are in fact far away from the sphere of spirituality, even not to say of reality. But the people have developed such a state of torpidity that they are neither prone to heat nor perceive anything in this connection. They have lost sight of the true reality, which is beyond both light and darkness. That's another thing. True reality is beyond both light and darkness. This is what has been shown in the emblem of the mission, and that is, in the true sense, the state of man's perfection, from which no decline or fall is possible. So, from the state of thumb, no decline or fall is possible. Babuji used to write that even when he was sending people into the central region using his powers, people used to gradually come down. So, that's something that you need to remember. So, those people had not reached the state of the thumb. Babuji is writing here, once you reach the state of the thumb, you will not have any fall. The saints have generally called this state of neither light or darkness or Satpad, which is not correct because this state is as much beyond that. So now again he is differentiating between Sat and Satpad. Sat is a quality. Satya is truth. Satpad is one of the stages that we get in spiritual progress. So there are three things. Sat is a quality. Truth is another character. Satpad is a state that we pass through before we enter into the central region. So don't get confused between Sat, Satya or the truth and Satpad. They are three different things. Satpad, which is not correct because this state is much beyond that, which is that state of ultimate is much beyond that. That is, in fact, the reflection of reality. Satpad is a reflection of reality. Please underline that. Satpad is a reflection of reality, which in itself is still beyond. This may be quite astonishing to most of those who go through these pages, but I have written only for those who are well advanced in spirituality and are in thorough knowledge of this science. It can only be experienced in a practical way and is not to be found within the bounds of religion. It is an entirely different path. It is in itself a science for which one may not be well fitted until unless he develops the capacity to perceive nature with his inner eyes. Okay, now we go to the concept of identity. What is identity? As regards identity, I may say that it can better be presumed to be something like a fine idea, which subsequently develops into thought. It is very difficult to convey in its exact sense. One may, however, take it to mean that which brings into our cognizance the consciousness of the origin, or a bit grosser form of the original consciousness, or in other words, reality garbed in something grosser, somewhat grosser covering. So he's trying to define identity. Now he says that what is that identity? It is that which means to say that which brings into our cognizance the consciousness of the origin. So there is an origin. What is it that the identity is? The identity actually helps us to get cognizance of the origin. So it makes us aware of the origin. That is one way of defining identity. Or the other way of doing it is that it's a bit grosser form of original consciousness. This is the second state. Or in other words, the third way of defining it is reality garbed in somewhat grosser covering. The grosser form strikes in our heart an idea that there must be something beyond, which serves for a cause to bring it into being. One might thereby be led to the conclusion that it too, in its turn, must have a cause on its own. The sequence of cause and effect may thus continue till one might come up to the point where the sequence too gets out of our consciousness. Logically, one might as well say even this must have a cause, but then it is all beyond human comprehension. Suffice it to say that it is at its finest level, it is denoted as identity. So you can say that the causeless cause is denoted as the identity. Upanishads talked about as the causeless cause. So when you cannot define the cause, then you call that as the identity. Every embodied soul must have an identity which at the highest level is finer and subtler. The subtler the identity, more powerful will the man will have in his life. So please underline that. The subtler the identity, more powerful man will a man be in his life. Why will they be powerful? Because they will have a very strong willpower. Identity remains in existence till the time of Mahapralaya, when it loses its individuality or identity and merges into the common identity, which later serves for the cause of the next creation. This is only, thus, it is only the individuality that ends and not the identity. It is so because of the dormant action at the root, at the center, where the difference between the being and non being is but nominal. So all the identity go and merge back into the common identity. The common identity is there next to the center. And when the time comes, that common identity becomes the substratum from which the creation again restarts. So this is about the identity. Any questions on this?
Couple of questions, brother.
Very
You
good.
said the identity is a place where it is causeless cause.
Yeah.
But causeless cause is the base, I thought.
That is not
Identity
something.
also.
That is what some of the people get
Mm.
confused.
Okay.
Identity is a part of that base, which is the causeless cause. So that also has the same nature as the causeless cause. It's like
Got it.
because identity is also nothing but something coming from the center only, like a spark coming
Mm-hmm.
from the center. So spark coming from the fire. So that is what happens. So the identity will still
Got it.
remain. So it has the same character as the center. Unfortunately, we just now said that the center has no character. We just now said center is beyond character,
Hmm.
activity, and consciousness. So identity is something that is part of the common identity from where everything comes from. Now, what exactly happens is, although we give the example of fire and the spark, here a better example is the other example I give. You throw a stone into a still lake where the water is still. Where the stone falls into the water, it creates a dimple. But because of that dimple, the latent power of motion in the water starts manifesting. Likewise, the what do you say, the still water of the lake is like the center. When the idea of creation fell in the center, then you had the waves coming out of the center. And when the waves come out of the center, suppose say one drop of water rises up from where the stone fell and it actually drops on other part of the lake. Now it creates ripples of its own. Now that is human creation. There is one God's creation in the larger view, and this water drop created its own human creation. Now this water drop is the identity. So that's a easier example to understand.
Uh, Sorry to take up the space, but just one question related to consciousness. I thought there is egoism somewhere after that consciousness, seed of consciousness, identity, like that it progresses, I thought. But here, what Babuji says is even at the very second level, just below the base, when it becomes the identity, there is consciousness.
One minute. The center itself is unaware.
Mm,
Just below the center where there is the latent motion, that is where the common identity lies. Just below the center.
mm,
So whatever is there in the common center, the just below the center, that becomes the substratum for the next creation.
mm,
Now, when the common identity, so what happens is, whatever the souls have experienced in this life, they partake of it, and when they lose their identity, the effect of those samskaras that they created are still there in the subtle form in the common identity. You got the point?
yes,
So,
yes, brother.
when the individual soul creates samskaras, we
Mm,
take the samskaras with us. Normally, before Mahapralaya, we only go to the stage of the soul and then come back again. We don't go back to the level of the common identity. Okay, that does not happen regularly. Now, when we actually progress spiritually and reach the center, near the center, and establish connection with the center, we are out of this cycle of life and death permanently. Okay. Now, what is the difference between a person who has established connection with the center versus an identity which has not established that connection, which is still in this cycle of life and death? At the time of Mahapralaya, all the individual identities merge back into the common identity. That's what Babuji is saying.
mm,
So what then happens is those identities which retained the impact of their samskaras at a fine level, they will come back in the next universe again. Those identities which have re-established the connection with the center, they need not come back out into the common identity, out of the common identity in the next creation. If at all they are going to come out, they are going to come out as functionaries of nature. That's all that happens. So once you have achieved your mergence with the center, then after Mahapralaya, you are not going to come out. It's quite possible that after Mahapralaya, you probably will have one of the functionaries of nature position.
Brother.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So So Mahapralaya is not uh, the end. Really, it's not the end.
Yeah.
This creation and dissolution is infinite. Mahapralaya is end for this creation. That's all.
Okay.
Got
Brother,
my
my question was consciousness, the way you have trained us,
correct? No,
it ends.
1 minute, 1 minute. The word use of the word consciousness is what has created confusion in you. Is that right?
Brother.
So, whatever you have picked up till now, whatever you had understood till now, that is the right perspective. Don't change that.
Got it.
Okay? Now, for the better use of the word, sometimes some words are used interchangeably. Don't get confused.
Got it.
So, consciousness and then the seed of the consciousness. That is how it is. And we go beyond the seed of the consciousness also. That's what we move towards the center. So don't get confused between the consciousness and the identity. Don't get confused.
Mhm.
Okay?
Where is the approach where I thought consciousness falls off when the identity begins.
Exactly. Exactly.
Consciousness is only up to the level of 16 circles of 11 circles of egoism.
Correct.
After that, there's no consciousness.
Exactly. At the
Thank you.
entry
Thank
of
you.
the, at the entry of the 13th point, the mind merges back into its origin. Consciousness also goes back. Ego also gets merges back into the origin, or it becomes modified into identity. The
Got it.
original
Got it.
true self. That is with our true self. This is the projected self. The innermost, the identity is our true self.
Mm.
Okay?
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other question? I think somebody else wanted to ask something. I think they asked about Mahapralaya. Oh, Mahapralaya is not the end. So there will be multiple creations. The creation is an eternal cycle. That is not going to stop. So not to worry about it. Nagaraj Patil, help me.
Brother, about the God,
Hmm. What about the God?
some light on this, brother. It is not still clear. It has been told it is a Brahman, or it is a.
There are three
Uh,
conceptions of God. God is eternal power. God is one with all the gunas. So he is called as Saguna Brahman. God is one with beyond all the gunas. That is why it is called as Nirguna Brahman. So God who has attributes of a character, attributes of guna, attributes of consciousness, they're all activity, they're all related to Saguna Brahman. So all the gods that we see who has a form, they're all part of the Saguna Brahman. Nirguna Brahman is beyond all these three. So that's what Babu writes, beyond consciousness, beyond the activity and quality. These are the three things beyond which the Nirguna Brahman is. And what Babuji is trying to emphasize is that really God is beyond the definition of Saguna and Nirguna. God did not define himself as Saguna or Nirguna. It is we as humans who are defining God as Saguna and Nirguna. And what Babuji is saying is God is beyond the conceptions of Saguna and Nirguna. That's what God is saying.
okay.
Babuji is saying. Okay.
Okay.
Uh,
Thank you.
just one last question, brother. Sorry. At the time of Mahapralaya, brother, you had told the base remains. So, what is that base? Only the center or the latent motion?
The base is the center. So don't have any confusion. The source
Thank
or
you.
the ultimate or the absolute or the base, everything is the same. Okay.
Got it,
Now,
brother.
along with the base, just near to the base, it's like if you want to ask me this question, does water and the latent motion hidden in water, they both exist in the end or only water exists? What will be your answer?
Both are
If,
indistinguishable.
if there is water, the motility of water is already inherently present there, right? You cannot
Got
say
it.
only water is there, but the ability to move is not there in the water.
Mhm.
Likewise, The base is there, and the latent motion is also there with the base. Like you have the latent motion of the water hidden in the water itself. You got the point?
Got it, brother. Everything merges into the latent motion at the time
Exactly.
of Mahapralaya. I
Exactly.
got it. Thank you.
So cosmology, the world is in existence with from time immemorial, and correct date is not to be traced out, although certain people have attempted to fix down the Srishti era. The only thing before creation was divinity in its purity and original state, devoid of soul, solidity, and grossness, and every object in its essence was merged in it. So now see here, every object in its essence was merged in it. Before the creation came into effect, there was only the latent motion around the center, and adjacent to it and in it was present the idea of creation. So the center is there, then there is the latent motion, and adjacent to the latent motion, there is the idea of the creation. You may call it the first thought or the initial knowledge, avidya. It may be called motion, show, vibration, force, or anything for understanding. It was the ultimate cause of creation of everything else necessary for it. So there are three things initially. There is the center, then the latent motion, and then the idea of creation. What happens when the time of creation came? The idea which lay hidden or sleeping in the latent motion managed, matured, and churned up the whole motion and created force or power, which rushed out. The subtlest particle got heated up. Thus, the covering set in form from the very first day. By the effect of the continuous heating, the particles began to come into motion. Its intensity went on increasing, adding wheels after wheels to it. Grossness began to develop by the effect of the growing intensity and vibrations. The action of every particle started and went on multiplying till reality was wrapped up within, like a silkworm in a cocoon. Thus, at the beginning of creation, there was a stir or motion. This motion was the basis of creation. It was the sacred thing, next only to God. The same thing appeared in the form, in the mind, in the human, as a human mind. When the time of creation came, preparation commenced, currents flowed, vibrations intensified, formation of knots started, momentums gathered, and churning process set in. Actions and reactions began and continued till objects began to assume individual forms. The process of creation came into full swing. Animate and inanimate objects began to come into existence. In the course of time, all the objects came to light and the universe was formed. The Prakriti came into existence through the effect of the revolving motion around the center. The motion generated power, which subsequently led to the cause of creation. This primary motion, or the stir, which arose to be the cause of the cosmic phenomenon, was brought into action by the dormant will of God. Now, if you were to ask, how did that show up happen? It was because of the dormant will of God. The stir set into motion the latent powers and processes of creation and animation started. The same root force, appearing as stir or stimulus, descended into every being in the form of a chief active force. In man, it came to be known as mind, at the root of which there is the same dormant will, just as it was in the stir. So the stir actually became the human mind. So what is next to the human mind? What is next to the human mind is the dormant will of God. Like the next to the stir is the dormant mind of God only. Thus, the human mind is closely identical with the root force or the original stir of which it is a part. As such, the functions of both are closely similar. It suffices to understand that the original stir is functioning in us as a human mind. So please just remember this. This is sufficient to remember as far as your understanding goes. Pointing out the cause of the stir, I would remark that the perfect calmness prevailed before creation. So this is another question for you. What existed before creation? Perfect calmness. Before creation came into action, every power and force lay frozen at its origin. The time for the change, however, came, motion got awakened and set things into action, resulting in the formation of forms and shapes in accordance with the will of nature. At the root of all this, there was something which we might call as an active force. But that root must have a base for itself. without which it cannot have its action, and it was the ultimate. Thus, we come to the conclusion that the creation was the result of the motion, and the motion that of the base, which is and shall be. So that's another way of looking at creation. The standstill state is the ultimate God. Where the motion is, then that is the God of creation or the Prakriti. This is one of the other conceptions. The ultimate state, which is the base, is motionless. It is dormant. That is the original state of God. But when the time of creation came, the dormant will of God created a kind of impulse in this idea of creation, which lay also dormant, which lay next to the common identity, which lay next to the latent motion. So then what happens when the dormant idea of the God brings this idea of creation into action, then the force started gushing out, and because of that force, all other things started coming up. This is how the creation occurred. So I'll stop here. Any questions before we move on?
The chief active force, it itself is the mind in humanity.
Correct.
Is it correct? Okay.
Correct.
Then what is the animate?
Animate and inanimate objects come later on.
Okay.
Even in animate and inanimate object, even in the inanimate object, there is a mind, but it's dormant. But in the human, the mind is very active. That's all.
One little deviation, but pertaining to this, brother. I don't know where I read. Just below the center, little very near to it, is an animating force, and just after that is a chief active force. Is it the same thing we are talking here? Chief active force? No. Okay.
Babuji does not differentiate between animate and inanimate at that level. No. We have never come across that in any of the writings of Babuji. So there is only one thing, which is they say center, there is the latent motion and the idea of creation. All are in a dormant state. When the time for creation comes, the dormant will of God makes that idea of creation active. So when the idea of creation becomes active, it imparts motion to this latent motion. So it is no longer a latent motion, it becomes an apparent motion. When it becomes an apparent motion, then the power or the force start gushing out in all directions, which then create vibrations, various other structures which are necessary for our growth, and that's how the creation proceeds. Later on, animate and inanimate objects come into being. This is how the creation occurs.
Brother, dormant will of a God means God is a form of energy?
God is the subtlest of the subtlest state. That's all you can say, which is beyond existence and non-existence. Beyond that, you cannot define him because our mind cannot reach up to God.
Okay.
By the time we reach up to God, to the center, see, God is in a state of unawareness because he doesn't have mind. Now, if we want to reach God, we also have to go into a state of unawareness. When we reach our identity, our original identity back, we still have awareness. So, as we move through the central region, even that awareness goes. When that awareness goes, we become identical with the center. That's how we are able to establish close connection with the center. Okay. Now, when we have established the connection, close connection with the center, if you remember that figure from the efficacy of Raja Yoga, Babuji puts the center as dot and he writes C around it. And that sphere of the sea is where all the liberated souls are swimming. That is the infinite ocean that Babuji talks about.
Okay.
You got the point?
Yes, brother.
So, in order to reach there, we have to become unaware. Only when we become unaware, we can actually establish a connection with the center, not otherwise. Okay? Sorry, continue, Managar.
One last question, sir. You talked about that sea around that center, no, brother? That picture where Babuji is talking about the sea. I just want to know, where exactly is that region in terms of the circles? Is it in the last circle before the Bhuma?
The sea.
The
No,
the
no, you
sea
have crossed
where the
the
liberated
sea.
souls are.
The sea is beyond all the circles, whatever is given.
Or it is in the center itself.
It is just next to the center. Yes.
Got it. Got it.
It has nothing
Thank
to do with the 23 circles that you read.
you. Got it.
Sea has nothing to do with the 23 circles. So don't get confused.
Got
Okay.
it. Thank you.
Before creation, there was only space all over. Thus, the being of God was a later development, and it took some time for its appearance. We see space as endless and eternal, so we conclude that God as well to be eternal. Time followed after God had come into being. Thus, space served as the mother of the creation of God, and time was the negative side of it. Everything must have its end in endlessness. Motion was also there in everything, however final and invisible it might be. One might also ask, who created space then? The only possible answer can be that the need for creation of the God and of the universe led to the cause of the existence of the space. So Babaji does not go beyond that. He says, who created space means the need for the creation of God and the universe led to the existence of the space. It is and shall ever be, and it's therefore eternal. Why not then worship space instead? This is definitely a hint about it in the Rig Veda, but the mystery remains unsolved and unclear for want of precise clarification. So there are some people who talk about worship space only. Why worship God, who is a derivative of space then? If one develops within him the state of Akasha, he has then reached the highest point, which corresponds to the final state of negation, where which everyone must duly aspire for. The solution is no doubt wonderful, but at the same time perfectly correct too. Akasha, or the space, is the absolute. It is not composed of any particles, nor is there any action in it. It is perfectly pure and unalloyed. It is, of course, very difficult to bring to home to the mind of people. Akasha is space and Avakasha is time, both widely different from each other. Time, the creation of space, may be taken as the grosser state of Akasha. As a matter of fact, the universe is the manifestation of Akasha, manifestation of Avakasha or time, while God is that of the Akasha, the space. So, universe is a creation of time, God is the creation of space. That is what Babuji is writing. The inner circle led to the creation of the outer universe. The intervening portion is the duration. If the outer remaining covering, along with the intermediary portion, in other words, the universe and the time, both are dissolved, as it happens at the time of Mahapralaya, then only Akasha or space remains. This is to say that the identity transforms into Akasha, or in other words, the identity is Akasha. Sister, there is another answer for your question. Identity is Akasha.
Brother,
Plus, go ahead, brother. Gatish.
is this Akasha the same as the Panchabhutas that we refer
No, no. Akasha here is space. In the Panchabhuta, when we use the word Akasha, it is called as ether. They are two fundamentally different things. Ether is an element. Akasha here refers to the space. It's not an element. You got the point?
Yes, brother. Yeah.
They are two different things. So don't get confused.
Normally, there is a controversial between space and time. What is before space and what was it before time?
Before time was God. And before God was space. This is what Babuji has written here. And this is what is there in the 1944 Whispers also. Some hints about is given, whether God came first or space was there first, and from the space God came. Babuji has written very clearly here, from space God came. But there are some issues which are unclear about the relationship between God and space. That's why there are some people who want to worship space itself as God. Because if God has come from space, then you can actually as well worship the space only then. Which is a very logical argument. Nothing wrong with it. So there are people who worship space as the highest. But Vivekananda, in his complete works, talks about it slightly differently. He says Reality is beyond three consciousness: the time, the space, the cause consciousness, the time consciousness, and the space consciousness. Beyond
What is
these
the first
three
one?
is the reality. So
What
the
was the first word you said?
cause consciousness.
Cause. Cause, time, and space.
Exactly. Space, time, and cause. That is what is there in everything that we do. Our mind functions only in these three realms: space consciousness, time consciousness, and cause consciousness. It's there every day in every activity. If I call you somewhere, the first thing I'll say, where should I come? Space. Then what time should I come? Time. Then you will ask, why should I come? Cause. So these are the three primary questions that our mind functions with. And God is beyond these three. If you look at it from the point of view of this, then that also makes sense actually. But Babaji does not elaborate on this. There is a dictation given by Lalaji about this particular thing, and Babaji has actually spoken about this here, based on the dictation that he had and the conversation that he had with Lalaji and Vivekananda in 1944 Whispers. But Vivekananda writes differently in his complete works, so just remember that. Okay?
Here, brother, about God, Babuji is saying, there, I mean, refers to different types of God, maybe. I mean, crude language I'm using. God as the base, as a bhuma, very different from latent motion that created God as Isha.
Exactly. Correct.
Okay, my understanding. And
See,
one question here.
1 minute, 1 minute. Anything that is created has a creator, and that creator is called as Isha. The literal meaning of the word Isha or Ishvara is creator. That's all it is, or the owner of it. Okay? So when the universe is created, it has a owner, it has a creator, and that creator is called as Ishvara. So when Jagat is created, we call that as Jagadishvara. When Kala is created, we call that as Mahakaleshvara. So when we add Ishvara, we denote the creator or the owner of that particular object. That's what it literally means, Ishvara. Okay, go ahead.
One, the terminology, brother, the inner circle and the outer circle, which Babuji is talking about here. Can you please clarify on that for me? The inner circle led to the creation of the outer universe. Which circle he's talking about? The 23rd circle, or the ring around the base, which created the next circle, which is a 23rd circle. I hope my question is clear.
If you stop the question, I can answer.
Over to you, brother.
Okay. The inner circle, what he's talking about, see, before what he's talking about, the inner and the outer circle, remember, he spoke about the space, then God, then time, and then creation. You got the point? So the time is in between the space, the God, and the creation. So the outer circle is the creation. The inner circle is the God. The intervening duration is the time. So when he talks about the inner and the outer circle, the inner circle denotes God. The intermediary stage is the time, the duration. The outer circle is the created universe.
Thank you.
What he is now saying is that both these things are taken back at the time of Mahapalaya. What are the two things? The created universe and the time both go back. Where does it go back? It goes back to God or the base.
Isha.
It goes back to God or the space. Now, if you have to remember this, according to what he is written here, space is the originator of God. Remember that. Ultimately, when the manifest universe and the time goes back, it can only go back up to God, not to the space.
Got it. This is what I was confused. Okay, got it.
You got the point?
So the Isha, got it. So Isha never dissolves.
Exactly.
Got it. Thank you.
Now, if you go back to Big Bang Theory, although there are some controversy about Big Bang Theory,
Mm.
now I just read a news article yesterday about scientists having taken the earliest picture of the universe. Earliest picture. We till now had about 3,60,000 years picture. A new telescope, a more powerful telescope, has taken picture even before that. Earlier than that, how was the universe? Now, the universe exists in space, right? Now, at one point in the space, there is an explosion. And that explosion gives rise to the space, to the God, then to the time, and to this entire manifest universe that you see. What was there before that explosion? And scientists call it as singularity. Here we call it as Advaita or one. What was there? One was there. What was that one? The base. Now you want to, since the base does not contain anything, you call it as negation or zero. Why do you call it as zero? Because it does not contain anything. No time, no universe, nothing it contains. That's why you call it as zero. However, what was existing? One thing was existing. So that's why you also call it as one. You got the point? So,
What is the last sentence you said?
see, there are two ways of looking at it. The one which existed did not contain anything.
Mhm.
So that's why it is called as because it is empty.
Hmm.
The one which was there was empty. That's all. So Babaji writes in other places, what was there before creation? Only one thing was there. Everything else came after that. What did that contain? It contained emptiness. Or he says that contained everything in the dormant form. And when the time of creation came, the dormant form actually started coming out, gushing out in force, and they started assuming shapes or forms. That is what happened. So don't kill. The difficulty is when we try to express something which is experienceable with words, sometimes the words fail, and when we use the word, we take the meaning of the word according to what we understand, not from the true sense. So, if you say that the base is there, you might as well ask the question, how many bases are there? Then the answer will be one base. Now, if you say the base is the base word is taken out of this one base, what remains then? Only one thing remains. You got the point? What does the base contain? Base contains zero. Nothing. It doesn't contain anything per se within itself. You remember that thing in Towards Infinity, Babuji writes, I tried to enter into the center. I got a peep into the center for a few seconds. After that, I was pushed out. That's what Babuji writes. So, in other words, the base is dormant but yet very powerful. It appears powerless, but it is very powerful. That's why Babaji calls the center as the powerless power. But till how many bases are there? Somebody were to question how many bases are there? There is only one base. You might as well say there is only one before creation came, which is also correct only. So mind came later on, words, speech came later on. So it becomes very difficult to express what exactly is there in the center, although Babaji tries to put it into words. And ultimately, since he cannot define everything so clearly, he is defined to the extent possible. He just says it is as it is. That's all. Don't scratch your head about it. It is just as it is. Once you experience it, you will know it. Okay? So I think you will still have some of these questions pondering in your mind, not to worry about it, but just remember this sequence. There was space. From space, God came. From God came time. From time, the manifest universe came. The creation came. If you just remember these four sequences, that will be easy for you. There are few other implications. When we say God came from space, there are few other implications that we'll talk about in some other session. So again, what is identity? It is nothing but Akasha. At the time when there was only the absolute and no creation, the question of time did not arise at all. When the thought of creation got enlivened in the base, it was perfectly free from everything. It proceeded on and due to the effect of motion got transformed into power, with its tendency directed towards action. But for the action, it must naturally stand in need of the base or field. Now, the brief pause intervening between the original thought and the subsequent being, or in other words, between the cause and the effect, was already there. This can appropriately be termed as duration or time, and it served as the field of action. This time, having merged into the power, got itself transformed into power for further actions towards creation. As a general rule, a thought, when it becomes deep, brings into effect something like a pause, which has a tremendous force. In the case of the center, the question of depth does not arise at all because of the perfect uniformity there. The idea of velocity of force or the direct action of the mind was also absent here, since the center of the ultimate Brahman, though absolute, did not possess the mind. Thus, whatever existed between the thought and action was power, which was termed as time. So there is a thought and there is an action. Whatever is in between is called as time. It has got power attached to it. Hence, we call that as time power. Kala
Brother,
Shakti.
brother,
Yes.
why the time is given a negative this thing here?
If you take space as positive, time is negative. That's all he says.
Okay, okay,
God is in the center.
okay,
You take space as positive on one side to keep the balance. You take time as
okay,
negative. So that will keep the perfect balance.
okay.
That's all. Okay. Because what existed at the time before creation? Perfect balance. That's all that existed. The same power we too got. Thus, whatever existed between thought and action was power, which is termed as time. The same power was too got into our share, but in accordance with our limited capacity. Now, in order to utilize this power, we have to merge it into the greater power of the center, with all its, with which is all and absolute. There is nothing in this world, not even the megaton bomb of modern science, to match this great power. Modern science may not have realized its full significance, though even if it had, it would have been utilized for the destructive purpose only. The power can, however, be brought down on the earth and utilized in the work of the by the exercise of strong willpower. A yogi at the highest as the level of ascent is, however, with it consciously or unconsciously. To my view, the science of physics cannot be taken as complete without a full knowledge of this great power, which is in fact the root of all powers. So when we are in the central region, when we cross over the realm of the time and we re-establish our connection with the center, we are now above time. So any person who gets established above time, the time comes into his control. So they can utilize the power of time in whichever way they want, according to the wish of the god. So Jiva and Brahman. Jiva, the individual soul, becomes cognizance of its being when it assumes individuality and thus becomes the basis of its existence. Originally, the Jiva and Brahman were quite akin to one another, and it is only the individuality of the Jiva which effected a difference between the two. Now, the Jiva, as the soul bound up within the ego or individuality, came into existence. The sphere it was in also began to cast its effects on it. Various hues, one after the other, began to settle around it, giving it new coloring. In a way, diversity began to settle in, and step by step, ego began to develop and grow thicker and denser. Feelings, emotions, desires began contributing to their own share to its grossness. Thus, the jiva, like a golden bird, got itself completely enclosed within the iron cage of the body. All this resulted from the effects of the action and the counteractions of thoughts, emotions, feelings, and desires, which went on adding to its opacity. This is, in the word, the whole history of the jiva. Now, happily, when it comes into dynamic contact with the one who remains of its origin, it begins to cast off the coverings one by one. But since the jiva possesses motion, it is cognizant of the creation too, the Brahman. Thus, the word jiva carries within it a sense of motion and the thinking as well. The two are parallel in the being of the jiva. Thus, the function of both the Jiva and the Brahman is almost the same, with only the difference being that Brahman covers the entire universe while the Jiva is confined only to the narrow sphere of the self or the ego. In this respect, Brahman may be said to have its own bondage, just as Jiva, with the difference perhaps that the bondage of the Jiva is thicker and grosser in comparison to the Brahman, limitations they both have. This is about the exact concept of the Brahman. So, you remember Babuji used the word Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. And then he said, if you want to go to the source or ultimate, you have to cross both these concepts of Brahman. That's exactly what he's now saying. You have to cross over the individuality of the Jiva. You also have to cross over the universality of the Brahman, and then we reach the center. I hope it is clear. Both Jiva and Brahman has limitations. If you want to go to the unlimited God, you have to cross over the limitations of the Brahman and the Jiva. Then only you can really be said to be entered into the sphere of unlimitedness. Is that fine?
Brother, what you said is refer to that two things are parallel in the being of the Jiva. You mean to say it won't meet each other, something like that? Parallel means.
We have not read about the parallelism. We are going to read about the parallelism next.
Okay.
The Brahman here, brother, is the same thing as the one that creates the universe after time, or is it Isha that came before time that Babuji is talking about here?
The Brahman, he's talking about both. All that I want you to grasp is, so the original Brahman, the God, is the Nirguna Brahman, which came from the space. Then you have the creator of the time, and then you have the creation from the time itself. Now, the creator which is within the bounds of the time is the Saguna Brahman. Now, all the Trimurtis that you talk about, they are also within the realm of the time. They are not beyond the time. All the functionaries of nature are within the realm of the time. All gods up to the Trimurtis are within the realm of the time. Got the point?
Yes, brother.
Parallelism in nature. The only thing in existence before creation came into existence was divinity in its original state, and everything in essence form was merged in it. The process of manifestation started with the Kshoba, which stirred up a churning movement in the sphere of the latent motion. The activity revived, and with it, the force got enlivened and started its action towards manifestation. This line of action, though in perfect consonance with divinity, appeared to its outer aspect to be somewhat different from it, since it had taken another course aiming at its manifestation. It may, for this form, be denoted as the line of humanity because of its close association with the formation of man. That's why I said, I gave the example of the lake. When the original creation started, suppose if one drop of water from one part of the lake falls on another part of the lake, then it creates its own ripples. That creation of that waterfall, the water drop, is the individual line of the line of humanity. The entire creation that is coming from the center is the line of divinity. So there are two lines, line of humanity and the line of divinity. Both the lines are now in action, divinity and humanity running side by side, parallel to each other. But since creation was the primary object at the root, the line of humanity began to acquire predominance, and everything, including man, began to assume a tangible form, though at subtlest at this stage. In other words, the line of humanity became the base of the entire structure, but its action remained subject to the dormant actions of the line of divinity, which ran also parallel to it. So the proper working of the force went on bringing out forms and shapes. As a matter of fact, humanity would never have worked so well until unless it had proceeded along in conjunction with divinity. In short, humanity set itself conjointly with divinity, running parallel to it. The action went on multiplying, and man, along with everything else, began to assume a grosser and grosser form. Everything in the composition of man falls under the classes of humanity, and with divinity as the root of all and everything. It is for this reason that they say God is within man, and the same view is held by almost all religions. Thus, our ultimate purpose can be served only when we keep a pace with divinity and link it with our line of humanity. So there is this divine line of creation, and there is this human line of creation. The human line of creation derives its power from the divine line of creation. However, it takes a different course altogether. When the human creation is in tune with the divine creation, we don't form any samskaras. We become more and more divine as we proceed towards the divinity. When the human creation is against the direction of the divine creation, then we form samskaras and we get entangled and become more and more grosser. If you can just remember this aspect, I think that is sufficient. Now, since both of them have come down from the one great God, the Absolute, humanity too, like divinity, was in the purest state. The force of activity in it was but nominal at the time, and it was so to say in a sleepy state. The jerks caused by actions and counteractions began to stir up a sort of wakefulness, and variations and contradictions began to come to view. Heat and cold made their diverse ways, promoting formations. All these things entered into the composition of man, and he became a conglomeration of all these things in existence. All that we have now to do is to bring them again into their original state, or in other words, to restore them to a state of poise and tranquility so as to keep up its link with divinity. The only way to accomplish it is by introducing into them proper moderation, and we do the same in Sahaj. This is the secret of nature, which I have exposed herein in order to bring people to a full understanding of the real meaning of the complete divinization of man. When you say complete divinization, what happens? Man's actions and man's condition aligns with that of the divine. How was man conditions when he was aligned with the divine? Every sense and faculty, everything was in a dormant state and was in moderation. So when we bring the senses and the faculties that we have got into dormant state, when we enter into a dormant state where the mind also becomes inactive or quiet, consciousness is no longer necessary for our being, then we can be said to be in close approximation with the divine. And that is when we say that the human is divinized. Now, avatar is also something that question that you get. Strictly speaking, it is we who have set up a tiny creation by providing the material which formed as basis. In it, the function of God was but nominal except for the primary stroke of will which stirred up the action. The actual root of all the things in existence was matter, which existed in essence form just in the same way as the root of all machinery in the iron ore under the earth. The stroke of will was full of high velocity, which is still there and still continue till the end. That is why our universe is still expanding. That original stroke of the creation, the force is still there, active, since our universe is still expanding. In this respect, the beginning and the end of the creation are like the two extremities of the same velocity. The middle space comprising of the real force was the main instrument for bringing out the entire structure of the universe into existence. It possesses immense power and gives out shocks like those of electric current. The middle portion serves as the central. Slightly below the center, there is a chief activating force which serves as the cause. This is also another point, seemingly only a few centimeters distant from the center point, which something like an animating force exists in proper moderation. I put it as only a few millimeters distance because of its being observed from a great distance. But if one takes a closer view of it, after getting out of the body limitations, the distance would then appear to be unlimited. The higher we go above the central point, the dimmer becomes the force, and it serves to indicate our close proximity with the real, because the real is very dormant. The dim force is that which falls into a man's lot, while the stronger force at the central point falls to the lot of avatars who are fully charged with the conditions of the point. Lord Krishna as avatar had come down from the sphere of central point, while the Lord Rama had come out from the other end. For this reason, he had more of human synonymity in him. He presents an ideal of life as one must try to have as a man. Some are the opinion that avatars do not have identity. I do not agree with them, since they have no Since if they do not have identity, they could not have worked bodily for the purpose of accomplishment of the task allocated to them. As for their work, they stand in need of a physical body which admits of growth and development. The identity is absolutely essential for them as well as it is for anybody else. The avatar come down for a definite purpose, endowed with all the necessary powers required for the accomplishment of the work allotted to them. That may, in other words, serve to be their samskars which brought them down into the world. The power withdraws from them after their work is finished. The difference between the ordinary man and an avatar is that man is covered with numerous sheaths, while an avatar is free from most of them. They have the divine within their perception, while the man is deprived of it. Now, though the origin of the man and the avatars is the same, the avatar is in closer contact with the divine. Everything he stands in need for comes to him from the eternal store. He receives divine commands to guide him in his works, which are popularly known as divine inspirations or Deva Shruti or Deva Vani. Now, since avatars possess activity and the possession of the mind or manas is necessary for them also, but theirs is purer mind and more balanced, and their actions are in accordance with the divine will. Therefore, it is wrong to presume that avatars do not possess the mind. Regarding the present personality at work today, as far as my reading goes, I can say that he comes down from the central point. Hence, he is in possession of the highly potential powers, though to our outer view, they might appear to be dim or subdued. None of the avatars who came down so far to the earth had ever been bestowed with the powers of the root. I gave this out on the basis of my reading in nature through the grace of God, who alone is the real knower of things.
Here are a few questions, brother.
Go ahead.
This is what I was talking. There are 4 things I would like you to connect and let us know. There is a line of divinity, line of humanity, there's a chief active force, there's an animating force.
Yeah. But
So,
you assumed, no, 1 minute. You assumed it in a slightly different way than what is written here. I'll just take the question from Yogita also. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow because I have another meeting at 8 o'clock. So we'll come back to this discussion and then from there we'll continue the next session. Okay? Yogita, sister, you also tell your question.
Brother, here it is said that the higher we go above the central point, the dimmer becomes the force. So that is we cannot go higher. The central point is the ultimate, right, brother?
That is the point I was about to make. So Pallavi sister is confusing between the center and the central point that Babuji has mentioned here. They are two different things. That is what I was about to say, but that would require a bit more explanation. That's why I said we will talk about it tomorrow. But what point you have picked up, Yogita, is correct. The central point is not what we call as the center that Babuji is talking about. How does this compare to what we read as the 23 circles? We will relate to that. Then it becomes easier for us to relate to what Babuji is written.
Okay, brother.
Point. So your point is correct. The central and the central point, the center and the central point, they are two different things. And Sister Pallavi has got confused that the central point itself is the center. No.
got it.
Okay. So we will
You will deal with this subject tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then we have just finished 2 minutes early. So we'll just stop.